In the office, I thought that maybe I should say something more to elaborate on what I said last week. And so when I went back and around 11, nearly 12 o'clock, I jotted out a few things. So it's not really a preparation as such. The main thing is I talk about, I share with you my understanding and in a sense my own evaluation of some of the thoughts of the humanistic psychologist. Particularly last week I talked about Erich Fromm. So, of course I started talking about the Dharma. That is the most important thing. If we study, as practicing Buddhist, if we go into the thoughts of other thinkers, modern thinkers, it is always a good thing, but they must be relevant to the Dhamma. One very, very important principle I have said in my recent public lecture is that we must remember to try to understand some modern thoughts, not over-enthusiastically, but at least some relevant modern thoughts, relevant Buddhism, in terms of, from the perspective of the Dharma, and not the other way around. Not to understand Buddhism in terms of modern theories. Then if we apply Buddhism in this way, then it becomes meaningful. So I'm not against the idea of application of Buddhism, as I said. In a way, in itself, the idea of application of Buddhism is a misnomer, because all teachings of the Buddha are meant to be applicable. The Buddha taught for only one purpose, that is the overcoming, the transcending of the human predicament, and what he calls dukkha. And he says all the teaching has only one taste. So the Buddha didn't set out as a theorist, he didn't set out as a philosopher, and certainly not philosopher in the modern sense. He didn't set out as a logician, he didn't set out as a linguist. He wanted to do only one thing: to communicate his discovery, his insight into reality, into the human situation, into the nature of human existence, and to teach us from the discovery how to transcend the human predicament. That is dukkha. Last week, after talking about, I started talking about Buddhism, and then towards the end only I mentioned Erich Fromm's conception of the fivefold human need, or characteristics, if you like. So I mentioned rather briefly. So today, firstly, I'd like to elaborate a little bit on that. And again, to link it up with Buddhism. If they cannot be linked up with Buddhism, then they are useless. And to try to understand what Erich Fromm and other humanistic psychologists are trying to say from the perspective of Buddhism. In fact, last week after talking about this, and because of time I had to stop, and then we went on to do the Metta Bhavana, and we went on to do our puja. And in the course of doing this, very spontaneously, some thoughts came to my mind and I shared with you, but they were not recorded. So today I want to include those comments and include them by way of elaboration. For instance, I talk about Metta Bhavana itself as a real, very realistic, concrete demonstration of how the Dhamma can fulfill this, what you may call, intrinsic or existential human needs, and in a manner that also in fact noticed by thinkers like Erich Fromm. Likewise, in our practice of making aspiration, in our practice of transferring so-called merit, sharing merit with ascended beings, all this can be extremely meaningful when you relate them to these modern psychological teachings. Then you realize that you are coming here to take part in these so-called rituals in a very meaningful way. Not because it is part of the activities, or part of the schedule of Buddha-Dharma Center and you happen to be members. It's not that. Or not because I emphasize it personally, emphasize them personally. You must yourself be aware of what you are doing, why you are doing it, and how you can benefit from it as a human being, as a practicing Buddhist. Then suddenly everything makes sense to you. You are not wasting your effort, your time on Monday mornings trying to get up early and to get ready to come here and to put aside all the other activities. You find what you're doing is really, you're trying to find solution to your own problems. By taking part in what we are doing here, you're trying to understand yourself as a human being. There can be nothing more important than that. At least first revise on the fivefold needs. Now what these people, these humanistic psychologists are saying is that we are humans because we have certain characteristics as humans. We have some very fundamental, intrinsic needs as human beings. So we are not animals, for example. In fact, we are not humans in the full sense, I would say. As Huxley once famously said, we are humanoid. Humanoid, not quite human. We are like human, but humanity, the point is, humanity is yet to be achieved. And Buddhism provides the frame of reference for us to achieve humanity, to be truly human. So to be Buddhist means to be truly human. And also the meaning of the so-called humanistic Buddhism, Yan Kan Phật Cao, all this become meaningful. So we are human and we cannot understand our behavior, our problem, our frustrations, our depressions properly, deeply enough, unless we understand our needs as humans, fundamental to a human, our nature as human. So these people started from their tradition to suggest that human being can be defined, if you like, in terms of certain intrinsic human needs, right? Now, Erich Fromm talks about the fivefold need. So let's first revise what are these fivefold needs. First is relatedness. And secondly is, last week I used the word transcendence, and that's the word that he mentions in some of his writing. In some other places he uses the word creativity. So this is the second need, the need for transcendence, the need for creativity. Thirdly, the need for rootedness, to be rooted. And fourthly, the need for a sense of identities, a sense of self-identity. And finally, the need of a frame of orientation. Actually, on the fifth point, I talk a lot, and I link it up with the need, the intrinsic, fundamental, existential need of all human beings of a religion. And as Eric Fromm puts it, religion can be understood in a very broad sense as a definite frame of reference with a definite goal of devotion, object of devotion. And that, the need for that is existential, in the sense that the need is rooted in human existence itself. As long as you exist in being, you cannot ignore that. You have that. That's what makes you a human being. And it means that everybody needs religion in that sense. Of course, he points out that, as we know, as we agree, quite rightly, that religion is a difficult to define. Now today I'm not going to repeat this thing because I've talked a lot about it. Okay? So last week also I ran through quickly on these fivefold needs. Maybe we should also briefly revise them. And then my purpose is today to link them up more clearly, more specifically with the Buddha-Dharma, with the Buddha's teaching. Actually, I want to suggest that we can understand human nature. We can find true solution to a human problem by studying the Buddha, by understanding the Buddha. Maybe a better word is by discerning the Buddha. Discerning the Buddha in his teachings as well as in his life and example. And that's what I'm trying to do. I've been trying to show you, demonstrate to you how it can be done. Always go back. Even when you have a problem, or when you have joy, when you find meaning in doing something, go back to his teaching. Go back to his life. If you can relate to him, actually you are relating to human nature. You are relating to yourself. So that makes the Buddha-Dharma, that makes a phenomena of the Buddha universally relevant to all human beings, irrespective of whether someone chooses to label himself as a Buddhist or not. In a sense, it doesn't matter. But he is in the deepest, in the most fundamental way, benefited if he understands the Dharma, if he understands the Buddha. Now, in the exposition of these psychologists, these humanistic psychologists, they don't quite show up so much of their understanding of the Dharma. And however, as I said, here and there you can feel that they also have been influenced definitely by Buddhism. Definitely when you look at Eric Fromm's writing, when you look at Maslow's writings and so on, you see, you find Buddhism coming up in various contexts. So let's come back to Eric Fromm's fivefold human characteristic. First, relatedness. Before we understand this need, we must understand why do we have this need. That's precisely because we are human beings. That means we have to understand what it means to be a human being in a unique sense. A human being is an animal who can be self-aware, first of all, and self-aware to a sufficient degree to qualify as a human being, if I might put it in perhaps a vague way. Some people argue that animals also have some kind of self-awareness, but human being is fully aware that I am a human being and I'm separate from other species and I'm separate from nature. So when this sense of self-awareness emerges and becomes sufficiently developed to the state of we feeling that we are humans and uniquely different from others, we also begin to be annihilated from nature. You see, animals feel oneness with nature in a very natural way, instinctive way. And so animals do not have problems that we have. Like, for example, depression that you people are talking so much in the Hong Kong society. I think you people are over preoccupied with this. But I can understand the concern also. Animals don't have those things. Animals may have some kind of anxiety when they are fighting as a species against other species for their survival, for instance, or fighting for food for their survival. So yes, that is that problems of themselves, but certainly not in the human manner. And they don't have kind of problems of human relationship, for instance. So these are uniquely human, and they arise precisely because we develop a high degree of self-awareness, and in that process we become annihilated from nature. And that's where we find the root of all problems. Now, in the case of Erich Fromm, actually his earlier thoughts were influenced by Freud on the one hand, and then later on, perhaps some even parallel to that, he was influenced by Karl Marx. But he has gone beyond them. In the two former thinkers, you find a definite emphasis on determinism. Freud, for instance, we know, emphasizes that human beings, our behaviors are determined by our needs, by our biological needs, by our physiological needs. So he advocates a form of biological determination, or what you may call human nature. Marx, on the other hand, stresses on determinism by society, particularly by economical system, political system. So in that sense, they are both determinists, and Fromm were influenced by them. But Fromm was able to go beyond them, and later he introduced an additional dimension in his thoughts that is importantly different, and that is the dimension of freedom.